Before we get into the stories, I'm excited to announce I have a new channel called Monster Trail Cams. Here's a quick trailer for my new channel. The link is below. Monster Trail Cams is your ticket to the unseen and supernatural. Sourced from a vast network of mystery hunters worldwide, our channel reveals a collection of strange creatures and supernatural events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From shadowy figures lurking in dense forests to inexplicable entities prowling under the cloak of night, each chilling clip peels back another layer of the world's untold mysteries. We release new episodes several times a week. Okay, now let's get to the stories. Do you ever feel like people just don't pay attention to what's going on around them? I do. I mean, how many people are there in Chicago, and it seems like I'm the only one who notices this strange, weird building? Okay, let me start from the beginning. I work at a bar in downtown Chicago. I get to work around 5 on the L train and get done about 1 in the morning. Then I take the train home. The bar is near this department store in an old building. I don't know when it was built. Seems like it was built around the 1920s. I go there sometimes if I need something, a new shirt or whatever, just because it's close to work. In the basement, they had a clearance area or outlet or whatever. I like to go there because everything was cheaper, you know. But one day I needed new socks, so I went there, and the basement part was closed. The escalator was blocked off and you couldn't even see down there anymore. I didn't think much of it at the time, except I wondered what they were going to put down there. I bought a couple pairs of regular-priced socks and asked the clerk. She said she didn't know, but she acted kind of weird about it. I went on to work and didn't think about it anymore. A week or so later, though, I was on my way to the L train to go home when I saw people moving some huge boxes into the bottom floor of the store. That wouldn't have been that weird except that it was 1 in the morning. Remember, they were using one of those hydraulic movers to bring them inside. I would have thought it was just store merchandise, but who moves in store merchandise in the middle of the night? Besides, they weren't bringing it in by the loading dock in back. I don't know why. I felt like they were in a hurry. They were moving fast. I counted 10 of those big boxes, like the size of a small car except turned on its side. I tried to stay far enough away so they wouldn't see me, and I did feel like they were looking around to see if anyone was watching. Again, not normal if they were just moving merchandise. I knew there was a freight elevator that they could be using to bring those boxes down to the basement, and I had a feeling that was what they were doing. Now here's where it starts to get really weird. I heard a scream come out of the last box as they moved it in. I know what you're thinking, like, how did I know it was coming from the box? I just knew. It was like something told me. Besides, it didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before, not like a person or a dog. It sounded otherworldly. That's the only way I can explain it. After that, I made a point to walk by the building on my way to the L train. In the afternoon, when I came to work, I never noticed anything odd at all. But every night I seemed to see or hear something different. The next day after the boxes, I heard loud grinding noises coming from that building, like a huge machine with gears. Or maybe like a circular saw, but huge and screeching, like it was cutting metal. How did no one else notice this? I'm thinking that because it's around 1 in the morning. The few people around were either drunk or something, I guess. Or maybe they just didn't want to hear it. I didn't hear that noise the night after. It was quiet, and I thought maybe it was just people bringing merchandise into the store after all. So a few days passed, and then every time I went by, I heard nothing. I still wondered what happened to those boxes, though. What was in them? Sometimes in the afternoon, I'd walk by the back and see people unloading trucks like normal. The stuff came in smaller boxes, and they unloaded it on the loading dock. It was a totally different operation than what I'd seen that one night. Every once in a while, I'd ask someone if they knew what was in the basement of the store now. No one ever knew. One day, an employee from the store came in wearing the uniform. She sat at the bar and ordered a double rum and Coke. I was nervous as I made it. I had to ask her. I had to know. As I gave her the drink, I thought she looked tired, stressed maybe. "Hey," I said casually, "I used to shop in the basement of your store." What's down there now?" She jumped a little, like I'd startled her. "What do you mean?" she said. "I mean, what's down there now? In the basement of the store?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "I don't know what you're talking about." I didn't believe her, not for a second. She knew something. I could tell by her reaction to my question, but it was also obvious that she wasn't going to tell me what it was. That night after my shift, I walked by the store. There are a few windows in that basement, the kind that are the high-up ones, you know what I mean? Like they are at street level on the outside, but inside the basement, they are high up near the ceiling. Well, every time I passed by them before, they had been dark. This time, though, I saw a faint green light coming out of them. My first thought was that it was just like Ghostbusters. It wasn't funny, though. It was actually scary because it pulsed and glowed like it was alive. And then there was a low scream that just kept going, like no brakes or anything. I guess it was more like between a scream and a moan. I felt like whatever was making that noise had just given up. That was the worst part. So now I think my next step will be the police. But I'm sort of scared about bringing any unwanted attention on myself, so I'm still thinking that over. When I was a kid, I lived in rural Louisiana with my mom, dad, and 2 sisters. I was the middle kid, and middle kids tend to be the loners of the pack. I spent a lot of time out stomping around in the wilderness, but because of venomous snakes, alligators, and the like, my parents were constantly telling me that I needed to stick close to the house. Of course, I rarely listened to them and would find reason to sneak off as often as possible. Eventually, they gave up on trying to keep me corralled indoors and told me simply to be home by meal times to check in. It was summertime, and being summer, I hadn't seen my friends in weeks, because the only time I ever really went out was to go to school. With school closed and me so far from town, it took some effort to get to hang out with them. My mom always knew this was hard for us kids, so she'd plan a few slumber parties throughout the summer so that we could get our friends out to the house to hang out and catch up during the long break. One night she planned one of these get-togethers for me and my friends. My 2 best friends, Chris and Alex, came out to the house and Mom made homemade pizza. We played Super Nintendo until our thumbs were sore, then decided to go outside and explore. Mom and Dad were always especially nervous about me taking friends out into the woods. I guess they figured that I was able to make my way around and avoid trouble, but it was too risky to take someone else's kids out there and potentially have them hurt or bit or lost or any number of strange things that can occur out in the swamplands of Louisiana. I told my friends we'd have to be quiet, sneaking out so my mom wouldn't try to stop us. We were able to avoid her and soon were free to explore the outdoors. I took them down to the swamp and showed them alligator tracks in the mud, which kind of scared them, so they wanted to head back to the house almost right away. I was regretting showing them the tracks, though, because being outside was my favorite thing to do, and I was kind of dreading heading back inside to stare at the TV some more. There wasn't a lot else to do out there, and I felt like a bad host not having better entertainment options for my friends. In fact, I guess I kind of felt like they'd treat me like a loser or not want to hang out anymore if I didn't do something to keep them entertained. That's when I remembered there was a really cool old abandoned house out in the trees that always struck me as a likely haunted spot. It took a little bit of convincing, but my friends did agree to come with me to check it out, so we started heading that way. It was a massive house, similar to the plantation-style homes that used to stretch out across the state, but not as big as most of them. It had the wide columns on the front porch and the wraparound balcony up top, though. Even before we got up to it, my friends were already impressed. There weren't any roads out there or anything anymore, so it was a very well-hidden secret. As we got close to the house, though, Alex suddenly stopped walking and started to dart back away, screaming. Chris and I both asked what the hell was going on, and Alex said there was something moving up on the balcony. We all stood there where we were and looked up. Sure enough, Something was slithering along the balcony, occasionally showing itself through gaps in the wood banister. It looked like a huge snake, at least 2 feet in diameter in the fattest part of it, and it had to have been at least 20 feet long because we could see the tail end of it through the holes on one side of the porch and a thicker part of it at the opposite corner, although we had yet to see the head. I'm a naturally curious person, so I wanted to see it better. I started creeping up closer to it while the other 2 yelled at me to not go. They seemed almost angry with me that I was advancing on the thing, but I refused to stop and come back. Finally, I found a large stick and threw it as hard and as high as I could. The thing had the long body of a snake and easily the 20 feet in length, like I said. But at the head of this thing was a set of shoulders, 2 arms, and a head and face that looked almost human. It had yellow glowing eyes and was flicking its tongue as it slithered toward us, reaching its hands out like it couldn't wait to grab one of us up for a snack. Luckily, it wasn't a very fast mover. We were able to get away from it pretty easily and ran straight back to my parents' house. We spent about an hour sitting on the floor in my bedroom, panicking that the thing would follow us home, but we never did see it again. After that, my friends weren't too interested in visiting me out in the swamps, and I can't say I blame them. I didn't do much exploring after that either. I wanted to tell you about an experience I had in the 90s, back when I was in my 20s. This was a few decades ago, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear it was still happening in the area today. For background, I was living in New York City at the time, and like many people, just wanted to experience the big city. I had one job as a waitress and another at a call center overnight that was only 4 hours, 3 days a week, so it wasn't horrible, but I was pretty tired a lot. When I decided to move to New York, I answered ads for roommate wanted and ended up finding a girl around my age named Tara, who had a really small 2-bedroom that she was subletting, so I took the spot after talking to her back and forth for a bit. Even back then, apartments weren't cheap, and Tara and I were working our butts off to afford the smallest apartment ever. My bedroom was more like a closet and just barely fit a twin bed. For comparison, just the other day I went to look at colleges with my son, and college dorm rooms are bigger than the rooms we were sleeping in. Because we worked so much, we weren't home often, but we both had Sunday nights off and made that a kind of movie, takeout night if we could afford it that week. We'd go out and get a DVD, back when Blockbuster was still a thing, maybe grab Chinese food and stay in. One Sunday, we were getting back from grabbing our food and found our neighbor Marge out in the hall. Marge was an older woman who was kind of a curmudgeon. If you said hi to her, she'd only nod, and she didn't like to chat. She wasn't social, so it was weird seeing her out in the hall, and Tara asked if she was okay. Marge looked anxious and was oddly chatty. She told us she'd seen someone out here from her peephole and kept hearing them, but when she would pop her head out, no one was there. Our building wasn't great and only had one staircase down to the first floor and a single elevator. We were on the 4th floor, and it would have been hard for someone to quickly hide if Marge opened the door to try and see them. Tara and I were skeptical, but said we'd keep an eye out. We left Marge in the hallway and went in to start our movie. We chatted a little about how weird that was, but dug into the food quickly and forgot about it. Then about 45 minutes into the movie, we both heard and kind of felt movement, like someone was hanging around outside the apartment door. The living area was the first area right inside the door, and the doors were pretty thin. We looked at each other and waited. The thudding of steps came again, and this time we saw a shadow pass by slowly from under the edge of the door. I got up right away and went to the peephole. The only thing I saw was a glimpse of flannel moving toward Marge's apartment. Tara had paused the DVD, and I could hear the person continuing to walk down the hall, away from the staircase and elevator. I was too scared to open the door, but wanted to see if this was a neighbor. There was a guy and his wife who lived down that way. The footsteps stopped, but I didn't hear a door open. Tara had come over and grabbed an umbrella for protection, so I slid the lock, opened the door, and stuck my head out. There was no one there. A moment later, Marge's door opened too, and she popped out and hissed, "See?" Tara and I were both a little scared now because I had definitely seen someone walk by the door. I told Marge it was probably the guy down at the end, but she said he and his wife were away visiting family in Connecticut. She was collecting their mail. Now we were extra weirded out. I went back in the apartment and just waited. Tara started the movie again, but we both stayed by the door. Within 10 minutes, we heard the footsteps again, going in the exact same direction. That was impossible since he'd already passed the door, and I hadn't seen him go back that way. We were both tense and whisper-argued about what to do. Tara wanted to call the police. I said we should just leave it and keep the door locked. In the end, Tara won, and we asked if they could send an officer down. I justified it because Marge was freaked out too, and it was the city. It took a while for the cop to get there. They talked to us and Marge, and then went to look at security footage. The landlord only had cameras at the stairwell entrances, not down the hallway. We waited while they looked the footage over. Eventually, the cop came back and said everything should be fine, but they'd send officers to patrol past through the night to check. That made me and Tara feel a little better, but Tara asked the landlord about it. Asked him if anything was on the cameras. He explained that they had seen someone on the camera and the person in a red flannel walk down the hallway from the stairwell, but they never saw the person come back to the stairwell. Then, about 10 minutes later, the video seemed to loop again, and the person showed up again walking down the hallway from the stairwell. It was like a glitch, but it was totally in line with what I'd seen and heard. Somehow they were getting back to the stairwell without us seeing, even though Marge and I had been watching. The landlord shared that Marge had told him about this happening before. Always with someone in a red flannel, every single time. Every time on the footage, the person did the same thing, started from the stairwell and walked down the hallway. They would do it 5 or 10 times before disappearing. No one has ever seen this guy in person. Nothing was ever taken. No apartments broken into, just a guy in red flannel walking down the hallway loudly and then completely disappearing. It really freaked Tara and me out. We talked to Marge a little bit about it that night and the cops came back, but nothing freaky happened again that night. We did experience it 2 more times before I ended up moving to a different building and Tara decided to go home to Pennsylvania. I guess 3rd time was a charm for us. The building has changed name and ownership since then, but I'd be curious to know if anyone there is still experiencing a man in red flannel pacing the 4th floor hallway and disappearing. I hope you don't mind a little bit of a different kind of story from an old man who tried to be a fisherman once. It might be a little different than what you're used to, but I think it will be of some interest. In the mid-1960s, I bought my first fishing boat and started fishing for swordfish out of Gloucester. To be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing, and it was a business venture that was short-lived, mostly due to my absolute ineptitude as a fisherman, but also because after what happened on the night I'm about to tell you about, I didn't have the courage to go back out ever again. I had hired a crew of 6. Benny and Jim were older guys that had been fishing swordfish most of their lives, so even though they weren't particularly as strong as the younger guys, they knew a ton. So I brought them on board to help teach me. Elaine was a tough old broad from the Boston area that had come to Gloucester chasing a man that didn't want her. After that didn't work out, she answered my help-wanted ad in search of some adventure. And anyway, I liked her spunk. Besides, she was about 5'11" and tough as nails, so I knew she could pull weight. Toby, Nathan, and Greg were all 3 young men that had come to work for me after quitting a job with their old fishboat captain, who had underpaid them for some work. Needless to say, I had a good crew, but I personally wasn't cut out for the work. It had already started to become apparent to most of them that they were really the ones in charge out on the water, and it had started to create some animosity between me and my workers. They were wanting higher wages, and I was recognizing a growing need to assert myself as the boss. When we set off on that trip, Benny told me that the younger men had already talked Elaine into helping them confront me about their low paychecks once we were away from shore. The plan was they were simply going to get me out onto the water, then refuse to work if I didn't offer them a significant raise in wages. This would mean I'd have to take the loss coming back to shore with no fish, or I'd have to take a loss paying them better. Either way, I was pretty screwed because as a new boat owner, I was already drowning in debt. I thought about turning around and docking the boat and telling them that I had already heard the plan, but Jim told me not to. He'd been through something similar before, years before, and he said that he'd help me negotiate something that would work for all of us. In hindsight, I'm pretty sure Benny and Jim were in on the ruse, and it was some kind of good cop, bad cop thing they were trying to pull. But however, it was meant to play out. I can only say it wound up being much, much weirder. As promised, as soon as it was too dark and we were too far out to turn the boat around and head back, I was called over to where all 6 crew members were gathered and waiting to speak to me. I already knew what was coming, so I took a deep breath and walked over to them. I figured I might as well get it over with and find out what the damage was going to be. No sooner did I step out, though, than I heard Toby yell, "What in the heck is that?" pointing out towards the water. We all turned and looked. The water was almost perfectly still except for one little funnel of water starting to twist up into the sky. It looked like the ocean was pouring a cup of tea upside down. We were a pretty good distance away. The only reason Toby even saw it was because that night the moon was shining brightly. At first, the funnel was only an inch or two wide, but the longer it twisted upward and the higher it got, the wider it spread out. Eventually, we started seeing it pull fish up with the water. It was all little fish at first, and they looked like they were swimming up the funnel toward the clouds. None of us knew what we were looking at. We all just stood around with our mouths wide open in disbelief. And remember, these were people who all knew the water very well. Then it wasn't little fish anymore. Huge swordfish, the kind we would have loved to have caught, started swimming upward into the sky. It was the darndest thing I'd ever seen. I remember one of the boys, I think Greg, asking us all if it was some kind of tornado, but that didn't make any sense because even though it was sucking water upward, it seemed to be sucking from the bottom of the ocean. The surface of the water was perfectly still. Our boat wasn't even rocking. Then all at once there were 3 or 4 bright flashes of light, bright enough that it looked like daylight out on the water, and then the funnel was gone. But the fish never fell back down. There was never any gust of wind, the water didn't move, nothing. I looked back at the crew, who only moments ago had been about to tell me they wanted more money, and none of us could think of a single thing to say. Elaine asked Benny and Jim if they'd ever seen anything like that before, and they both shook their heads. None of us knew anything about what we'd just seen, but I did know something. It was time to turn the boat around and head back to shore. I paid the crew for the whole week, despite us only being out on the boat for less than 18 hours, and told them it had been a pleasure and that I would be selling the boat. I did sell the boat, and that's what basically saved my friendship with those 6 crew members.